let's get on with it. The Policy and Education Working Group, we meet most Thursdays. I think we're doing now the first and third Thursdays from noon to 1. We try to keep it to an hour. And then once a month, we give our meeting over to the Policy and Education Working Group, and that is an hour and a half. I just want to quickly mention that one of the other things we're up to in policy and education, on behalf of the California Poor People's Campaign, we are hosting a webinar this Sunday that I hope all of you will join us for. It is on the climate crisis, and it's very exciting that our keynote speakers include Tom Goldtooth, who is a founder and executive director of the Indigenous Environmental Network. He is stirring things up in Glasgow even as we speak. Also, William Barber III. Yes, William Barber III, not the second. That's the son of William Barber, who is also an activist very involved in the environmental movement. And Jackie Patterson, who is with the Chisholm Project, doing a lot of frontlines work on the environment, and Hosea Williams, who is a campaigner with the Sunrise movement, a really vibrant movement of young people. So this is really exciting. It's 3 o'clock Pacific time, and people from other parts of the country can join us. I think there are people from other parts of the country on right now for this study group, and we always welcome them, of course. And for those of you who are in the New York City and Washington, D.C. area, the Pacifica stations will be carrying the program live, and we'll also be live streaming. So we're really active, a lot going on. Nell and the entire tech team, thank you so very much. And let's get on with our reading group today.
Thank you so much,
Thanks.
Margaret. And so with that, I want to acknowledge that Jim Pugh and Sydney Ross Risden are going to be our presenters for the session. And I want to do just appreciate them for taking the time to be here with us and bring the knowledge, because we know knowledge is power. And then I want to just do a little bit of housekeeping. And so you've already been informed that we're going to be recording. Thank you, Michelle Hayes, for reminding me to turn on the closed captioning and the recording. And I want to, you've been introducing yourselves in the chat, so thank you for that. And then you'll have some more time to introduce yourself, you know, in more detail in the small groups. Please stay on mute unless you are speaking to the group, and feel free to put your questions and comments.
I bought her a chair
in the chat.
And okay. I bought her a case.
Please put yourself on mute if you're not speaking to the group. And if you can get some tech support on that, that would be great. Okay, thanks so much. And so today, we are gonna, oh, can the tech support mute?
That's right there,
Do we have the capacity to mute the audience? Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And so, so we're gonna be watch a presentation on the Jubilee Policy Platform part 2.2, establish a universal and guaranteed adequate income. And following that presentation, there'll be breakout groups so that you can, you know, think some together about what you just heard, read, and what it means. And then we'll be back to check in the big group before closing. So with that, I'd like to ask Jim if he would start here with just announcing where we are and what we're doing today. And I want to call your attention to this quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that way back in 1960, I think that's 68, he was calling for a guaranteed annual income. We must develop a program that will drive the nation to a guaranteed annual income. And so we still have that demand. And so the Jubilee Policy Platform is designed to challenge the 5 interlocking injustices: systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, militarism, and the war economy, and the distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism. And it has 5 principles that we're going to watch a short video about.
From Alaska to Arkansas, the Carolinas to California, Mississippi to Maine, Kansas to Kentucky, the Bronx to the border, Appalachian hollers to Apache sacred lands, people are coming together to organize their moral outrage against systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, militarism, and the war economy, and the false narrative of religious nationalism into a powerful moral fusion movement.
There are 140 million people who are poor and struggling against these injustices in the richest country in the world. A society sick with these injustices needs a voice rooted in our deepest moral and constitutional values to remind us of who we are and who we must be.
A moral policy agenda to heal the nation. The Poor People's Jubilee platform proclaims that moral policy is economically sound policy. That the 140 million are not only the hope of the poor, that the least of these, who are in actuality most of us, can lead the nation out of the pain that it's been feeling.
The rejected are leading a moral and economic revival to save the heart and soul of this nation. Our platform is grounded in 5 principles.
We need a moral revolution of values to repair the breach in our society. This platform abides by our deepest constitutional and moral commitments to justice. Where harm has been done, it must be acknowledged and undone.
Everybody in, nobody out. Too many people are hurting, and we can't be silent anymore.
When you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. Instead of trickle down, we start with bottom up.
Prioritize the leadership of the poor, low income, and most impacted. Those who are on the front lines of these crises must also be in the lead in identifying their solutions.
Debts that cannot be paid must be relieved. We demand freedom from servicing debts that cannot be paid.
The Poor People's Jubilee platform now identifies policy and legislative priorities to heal our nation.
We've been investing in punishing the poor, but we must now invest in the welfare of all. We've been investing in systemic racism and voter suppression, but we must now invest in expanding democracy.
We have been investing in killing people. We now must invest in life.
We have been investing in the wealthy and corporations. We must now invest in the people who have built up this country and make it run every day. The 140 million and more who have been abandoned in an era of abundance.
Somebody's been hurting our people, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore.
We won't be silent anymore.
Not be silent anymore.
So thank you very much. I want to just acknowledge that the Jubilee art was created by David Solnit, an artist extraordinaire that we have the good fortune of be in residence here in the Bay Area. And the Poor People's Campaign uses art and field musicology as integral elements of the organizing that we do. So wherever we are, you're going to hear song and you're going to hear art. So just want to say a shout out to David Solon for his art. And there'll be a link in the chat so that you can access the Jubilee art and use it as backgrounds, print it out, however you see fit to use that. So the platform has 5 parts and abides by our deepest constitutional and moral commitments to justice, as you heard in the video. So where we are is we have made it all the way through part 1, and we're at part 2, promote the general welfare, the right to welfare, and an adequate standard of living. And under point 2, part 2, we're at point 2, establish a universal and guaranteed adequate income. And with that, I'll turn it over to our presenters, Sydney Ross Risden and Jim Pugh.
Thanks, Nell. So I can start us off here. So my name is Jim Pugh. I use he, him pronouns. I'm based in Ohlone, Oakland. I am a member of the California Poor People's Campaign's Coordinating Committee. I also run an organization called Universal Income Project, which is, we as an organization have been doing work for the last 6 years around the idea of universal basic income, guaranteed income, working to push this idea out there to get people talking about it more. And then more recently, actually doing a lot of work around policies in that space, pilot programs that have been popping up all across California and around the country, and working on some state level and federal policy. So yeah, I was more than happy to join to talk about these ideas with folks here, since this is kind of bringing together my 2 worlds. Yeah, just to, I guess there isn't, I'll start at the beginning, because I imagine some of the folks here might not be familiar with what universal basic and guaranteed income are. The concept of these policies is that everyone in our society should have enough to survive on. I mean, it's so in line with the general principles of the Poor People's Campaign that no matter your situation, no matter how old you are, no matter if you're working or not, no matter where you come from, you should have enough to survive. And with guaranteed income, the way you do that is by providing every member of society with regular payments and income that's enough to cover basic needs. And by doing this, it really is lifting from the bottom, and that it's making sure that everyone has that money out there to be able to afford food, to be able to afford all of the expenses that come up in your life, in a way that tragically is not at all true right now. And so by doing this, we really tackle this notion that exists in our society, this distorted narrative about that some people are deserving of surviving and some people are not. And all of the means tests, all of the hoops that people are forced to jump through to access support today, that all of those things stem from that idea that only certain people actually deserve to have enough. And that's what guaranteed income really aims to turn on its head, and saying that everyone should get this. Doesn't matter your situation, everyone should have that baseline income. In the Jubilee platform, the section is, rather than talking about a basic income, it talks about an adequate income. So it actually goes a bit farther even than a lot of the conversations around, you'll hear around universal basic income, in that it's saying that every person, every adult should be receiving $2,000 per month, and every child should be receiving $1,000. And again, there's nothing you have to do to qualify for this. Just for being a person, people would be getting this money. And so that would ensure that you're bringing people up to a level where you're fully lifting people out of poverty and actually giving them enough to be able to have a decent life in just about every situation, by providing that foundational cash floor, so that those basic expenses, people will have the resources automatically to be able to afford those things. So there's a few key points to consider when talking about the idea of a guaranteed income, that in order to make sure that it is actually fully inclusive, it's going to not miss the specific challenges that many people might be dealing with in their lives. And so one thing in particular is what it means to be universal. And so that if we truly want to lift everyone up, we need to make sure that we're including folks that don't have documentation, people who file their taxes with the ITINs, which is what you use if you're not if you're not a citizen, you don't have a social security number, and also folks like dependent adults, anyone over the age of 18, including college students. So just thinking through the people who oftentimes with our existing social programs might be left out, making sure that all those folks are being included in this policy as well.
Okay.
Another,
Ooh.
So go ahead, Cindy. Yeah,
Did
sorry,
I say a
please
few
jump in.
things,
Yeah.
or would you like to continue?
No, please jump in.
Yeah,
Do you want me to go back?
I wanted just to talk about some of the roots of the basic income movement, and that it includes the welfare rights movement, which was led by Black mothers who had 4 goals. One was an adequate income, dignity, justice, and democratic participation. And Johnny Tillman, one of the leaders and my favorite people of the National Welfare Rights Organization, said, and I quote, "If I were president, I'd start paying women a living wage for doing the work we're already doing, child raising and housekeeping, and the welfare crisis would be over. Just like that, housewives would be getting wages too." And in 1972, author, women's rights, and anti-racist campaigner Selma James founded the Wages for Housework campaign, an international grassroots network campaigning for recognition and payment for all caring work in the home and on the land. When people have asked, where's the money going to come from? We have said from the start, invest in caring, not killing. Let's reclaim the military budget. Not dissimilar from the Poor People's Campaign. And we've continued that fight for 50 years. I wanted to give just a couple of highlights that at the US National Women's Conference in Houston in 1977, together with the welfare rights movement, we worked to defeat a workfare resolution that was brought forward by conference organizers and replaced it with a resolution that says, the elimination of poverty must be a priority for all those working for equal rights for women. And just as with other workers, homemakers receiving income transfer payments should be afforded the dignity of having that payment called a wage, not welfare. We also took our demands to the United Nations, including the UN conferences on women in Nairobi, Kenya in 1985, and in Beijing in 1995. And with our petition pressing governments to count all women's work in the home, on the land, and in the community in the gross domestic product, which was signed by 1,200 organizations representing millions of women worldwide, we won as part of the Beijing platform of action that governments must measure and value unwaged work in national accounts. And Jim was talking about being sure not to leave out people when looking at the basic income. And I would only add that including dependent adults, we should also include the 50 million unpaid family caregivers, the majority of whom are women, who are caring for elders and people who are infirm, that they be included too. Women, in fact, provide more healthcare than all healthcare industries combined, and women's unpaid work contributes 1.5 trillion to the US economy every year. So we urge the Poor People's Campaign to include the caregivers of dependent adults also.
Thank you for that, Sydney.
Yep.
And we're going to get to there's a care income part here as well. Before that, I wanted to make one other note here, which is something that's really important with any sort of guaranteed income proposal is that making sure the payments you received for those are not counted as income against other federal assistance programs. There's a lot of other programs out there providing absolutely critical support to folks in different challenging situations. As with many policies, you need to be careful in how you structure guaranteed income to make sure that you don't unintentionally leave some people worse off. Because again, with our system today, it can be very, if you're in the wrong situation, you may lose access. So programs like Medicaid that have strict income and asset limits, other forms of support like TANF and SNAP, those are all things that are providing really important support. And so making sure when we talk about instituting a guaranteed income, that the payments you receive don't count against your qualification, your eligibility for that, so that you continue to receive the other support at the same time without having to worry about what might change.
And I just
go ahead,
add,
Sydney.
can I add to that?
Yeah.
One thing that we found out in two ways recently, in relation to the child tax credit, which has been part of Biden's Build Back Better, that until Build Back Better was made fully refundable, which is what Jim is talking about, that everybody is eligible. People who were too poor to have to pay taxes didn't get the earned income tax credit and weren't eligible for the child tax credit. Also, we found that in California, people who are too poor to pay taxes aren't eligible for the stimulus payment from the state of California. So I think this issue of being sure that everybody is covered, that it's fully refundable, is a really important one.
And it really does. I think the overall message we had from the start with that song is just so core here, is that from the bottom, this is the sort of thing where as long as you think about how you set up your program so that the people at the bottom are supported, everything else works out. But far too often when people are thinking about how to make these work, they start with the middle class or someone else, and then you end up with something that doesn't actually support everyone. And then finally, before we get to the care income, there was a provision in the Jubilee platform that basically had an opt-out mechanism for high income individuals, so that folks who already had a decent income they were earning from other sources wouldn't necessarily be receiving that extra support.
And I think I want to start by the fact that women and girls do more than 3/4 of the world's unpaid care work, a total of 12.5 billion hours a day, both in the family and on the land, including growing the food that sustains so many families, especially in countries of the global South. The market values unwaged work at $10.8 trillion, though they never suggest that women should get any of that money. But women, including the Wages for Housework campaign and the Global Women's Strike, which it coordinates, press for wages for all our work, including that unwaged work. And we've made some gains, including recently the campaigning we've been doing with other organizations to keep the child tax credit in the Build Back Better Act, without any work requirements, without any of Manchin's fiddling with it, that it should be available to all families who need it. And we continue to say that it should be made permanent and paid to the mother or primary caregiver. It's not wages for all our work. It's not a basic income yet, but we say of the child tax credit, children need it and mothers have earned it. And then in 2019, the Green New Deal for Europe released its plan, and it took this forward by proposing a care income as a key part of its program for climate justice. And the Global Women's Strike is campaigning for a care income across the planet for all those of every gender who care for people, the urban and rural environment, and the natural world. We say protecting people and protecting the earth must be equated and prioritized over the uncaring market. We invite people and organizations to sign on to our letter to governments pressing for a care income now. And if someone can post that link in the chat, that would be great. And I wanted to bring it up to where things are today. With a number of people and a lot of focus on COP27 the COP27 conference taking place in Scotland. Demands for our people and the planet are being brought forward, not so much inside the conference, but in marches and protests and workshops with young people, indigenous people, people of color from countries of the global south, demanding from the global north and international financial institutions that the money we need to repair and reverse damage to the environment should come from the global north and from those industries, including people paying people to do that work. There's also a demand. They're also demanding a care income straight out. And Global Women's Strike hosted a workshop at COP26 yesterday, which included an amazing video from Andhra Pradesh, which is a province in India where farmers, including women farmer self-help collectives, are rejecting chemical herbicides and pesticides and returning to traditional natural ways of growing food that protect and sustain the land. They're demanding, and we agree, that rather than subsidies going to mega farms to poison the land, subsidies must go instead to small farmers and others who will care for the soil and the environment more broadly in ways that will help reverse climate change. It's hard to make an income demand more basic than that. I encourage you all to watch the video of the self-help women's collectives in Andhra Pradesh. And that's also going to be posted in the chat. I found that it really lifted my heart, and I hope it will lift yours too.
And I would just add, I think that the idea of a universal guaranteed income and a care income, these are two things that really complement each other well, because with the universal guaranteed income, you're ensuring that everyone, regardless of situation, has that floor. And then beyond that, to say that recognizing the value, which is, as Sydney mentioned, for so long gone unrecognized, of just this immense amount of critical work that's happening there. And so those things are, in my mind, can work really, really well together. And so I was happy to see those paired in the platform here. Oops, not there yet. The other thing I was going to say, just to say a bit about where things are at today with the general idea of guaranteed income, is just in the past few years, there's been just a massive surge in interest around this idea. If you went back more than 5 years, there was very few people talking about this. You now have pilot programs that are happening at the city level, where basically the city is launching these initiatives to provide some of their residents with some sort of guaranteed basic income. There was here in California, in Stockton, starting in 2018, they had some Stockton residents that were being given $500 every month for 2 years, and basically looking at what happens, like when you have that foundational income floor, what does that mean for people's lives? What they saw was that, well, pretty much everything got better. People's mental health improved drastically, that there was just like not being on the edge constantly with financial precarity, which is so common amongst 140 million across this country. It just made a huge difference in people's lives, that there was greater food security. People were able to cover their basic needs. And something that I think surprised a lot of people is that the folks who were receiving that money ended up actually getting more employment. That you had a lot of people who had been working part-time, who, having that extra income support, were able to actually, it basically gave them the time and flexibility to figure out other things to be doing. And so a lot of them transitioned to full-time employment. Another thing that's come up in pilot programs is seeing that there are some people who do stop working, but it is almost entirely either young people who are going back to school, or it's parents who are staying home to care for children, or other family members. And so the sorts of behavior that is unfortunately not recognized in a lot of our economic assessments, but is providing just such invaluable support to our society at large, doing the things that need to be done. And so you now have, starting with that Stockton pilot 3 years ago, There are now more than 100 pilot programs around guaranteed income that have launched or are launching across the country. There's more than 20 in California alone. You have San Francisco has, depending on how you count it, somewhere between 4 and 15 programs they've now launched. There's a couple in Oakland, Marin, Mountain View, LA has 2 programs, Long Beach is launching one. A few other cities, Yolo County has launched one. So a lot of different programs that are providing residents with this unconditional cash payments. And the intention there is to both provide support to people in the moment and also to build momentum for this idea, that recognizing that at the end of the day, we will need federal policy to really have this be something universal, but that we can showcase what difference it makes for people's lives in these smaller pilots. And so trying to build up more and more momentum so that hopefully we reach a point where our politicians will make the political choice that we don't actually need to have a society with poverty, and that we can have that fundamental guarantee.
And I think, Jim, that that's continuing to grow, because I know LA County is looking at another wider, their LA County's program now is focused specifically on children or young people getting out of foster care. But they're looking at a bigger program, and that's in the planning stages. And just this past couple of weeks, LA City launched its basic income program for 3,000 families.
Right. This is the largest, from a financial perspective, it's the largest basic income program that has been launched in the US in modern history.
Wow.
So we're keeping our fingers crossed.
Okay, so thank you all so much. And yeah, that's a lot to take in and consider, both the history and the present situation around, how are we gonna lift from the bottom so everybody rises, that all the work that's being done for us to have the lives that we have, that be recognized, valued, and paid, and that nobody be forced to live in poverty based on their need to take care of their families, or their inability to get a job that pays not just a minimum wage, but a living wage. So thank you, Sydney and Jim. And so at this time, what we'd like to do is break up into breakout rooms so that you all get a chance to talk about what you have heard and hopefully you read in the when you read the Jubilee policy platform. So Reverend Ron, can I ask you to just give people some instructions about what's going to happen in the breakout groups and get those?
Absolutely. So while Nell sets up our breakout groups, the intention is to get into groups, identify a facilitator, and identify somebody who's going to report back if we have enough time to report back, and ensure space that everybody has a chance to talk. And we have, Peg has posted stuff into the chat that has the information, and talk about how will this make a difference in your community if this is instituted. And I think that is our basic question for every one of these Jubilee policy platform things. What difference will this make in your life and in the life of your neighbors if this actually gets realized? And I hope that you can introduce yourselves, give your name, pronouns, your location, and if these demands were met, what impact would it have on you, your community, and your state? And enjoy sharing your ideas with each other. And we'll be back into the large group after we have a chance to chat.
Okay, thank you so much, Reverend Rowan. And with that, I'm going to open all the rooms. And so if you see an invite to join a room, please accept that invite. And we'll see you in 20 minutes. Welcome back, everybody.
That was a
Thank
pretty
you.
good amount of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had some good conversation.
I felt we got to know each other a bit.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Nice. Well, that is the goal of the breakouts, is for everybody to be able to, at least get to know you people a little better than you would be able to in the big room. So yeah, we're glad for that.
We're
Okay, so
back from our group.
okay, thank you so much. I think everybody is back now. And I'm wondering, Sydney and Jim, do you want to facilitate the Q&A?
All right. If folks have, or I guess I don't, this is a question, I think for now, is there, we do report backs generally or just do Q&A?
Yeah, we just take comments and questions on the,
Okay.
and just hear from folks, as many people as we have time for.
Well, if folks want to share something that came up in discussions, or if you have any questions, if you want to put yourself on stack, so either just type the word stack in the chat, or if you want to use the Zoom raise your hand functionality, either way would work.
Betty, do you want to report for our group?
Sure, I'll report from our group. We and Margaret. Well, we had a Canadian who is seeking a green card here in the States, but she gave us a good perspective of how I agree with her that they're doing things a little better in Canada. Even though they're not as wealthy as us and as big as us in population, how they do tax their people like progressive taxation, where if the richer you are, the more you get taxed. And also that they have some safety nets like single payer healthcare there, that so that they're in a better position, at least ahead of us for sure. We spoke about, we discussed about, a little bit about, who should get this care, care or basic income, care income or basic income. And, there was a difference of opinion. Some people thought that, if you have a certain higher income that you shouldn't get it. But others was like, well, they might be taxed for it. So, maybe that shouldn't be the case. But also, maybe means testing is not appropriate along the line of anywhere, because, that means that if you have means test for one group, you're then means testing for another group. And possibly, of course, poor people and lower middle class people always they're the ones that means test to the hilt, right? So we brought that up for a discussion. Was talk of a little bit about, of course, increasing that minimum wage. We still have to work on getting that done. And I think overall, people agreed that, how, and Margaret brought some really good points up, and bringing up the example of Maine, where there's a particular whale that's in jeopardy, and how they're asking the lobster, people, the fishermen that go out and get lobsters, that they don't want them to do what they do, but they're like, we have to do this to survive. So how that is a care system, technically, because you're asking, if you give them that care income, you're caring for them so that they can care for these species. So it is kind of a care, a part of that caring, not necessarily just for the nuclear family or the family, or caring for, but also the care of the land, where there's, farmers that, farmers that are big, high industry farmers that get subsidized, and then you have, and that are putting chemicals into our foods and our ground soil. And then you have these farmers that many times in the South, black and brown farmers that are dealing with the land in a more natural way and trying to farm, and they're not getting subsidized. They're getting nothing. And how an income could actually, because they're caring for our earth, and taking care of our main source of life, which is the food and water and soil. So interesting, robust conversation in our breakout room.
Thanks, Betty. I see Jenna on stack.
Yeah, so I took notes
for our group, we also had a really robust discussion. I'm looking back at what we discussed, and I think that one of the major themes was the stress that comes from trying to make ends meet when you don't have enough. And, just it's a quality of life issue when you're trying to pick between, do I pay rent? Do I pay bills? Do I pay for the kids? And so Sydney pointed out, as far as care income, what a difference it has made for mothers with those decisions in paying for certain expenses. And then also, I thought she said something interesting was that children notice that their moms are less stressed out, which is very interesting if you think about that dynamic. Also, we were talking about, maybe some of these numbers in terms of adequate income may even need to be increased given, cost of living in certain areas and how expensive it is. And we all know in California, it's so expensive to live here. So looking at that, and then also looking at sources of these funds. We spend so much money on prisons, and having people in prison, in the prison industrial complex, that are not violent offenders, that we're paying for, and then also, of course, military funding that many feel is excessive and unnecessary. So I think those are some of the main points. And then we also talked about just the dignity that it provides folks when you say, I'm going to invest in you and your family. We're giving so many kickbacks to corporations, and giving them funding and sort of dignifying their efforts, and yet not doing things for the American family. So you had a really good discussion, really good points, and those are just some of them.
Jenna, well, one thing I would add or note on that is I think your use of the term investment in people, because I think that oftentimes when people are disparaging this idea, they say, oh, it's just a handout, you're giving people cash, without recognizing that this can be transformational, that it can shift what trajectory you take in life. So there was a study a couple years back which found an conservative estimate, that childhood poverty in the US costs our society $1 trillion every year, because of what impact that makes on the lives of those children when they grow up. And so when you put programs into place that reduce child poverty, those actually can far more than pay for themselves. So I think the recent expansion of child tax credits is a good example. That costs somewhere on the order of $100 billion every year, but is expected to reduce child poverty by using the standard measure by about half. And so you're actually getting far more back for that investment. So when people say we can't afford it, besides obviously that being wrong because we're spending on things like the military, we really can't, you could say we can't afford not to do it if you're trying to be fiscally responsible. Other folks want to share or have any questions?
I wonder if any of the other groups want to share some of the discussion. It's always good for us in policy and education. We do an evaluation following these groups. So we like to have as much input as possible, and also any suggestions you might have for us moving forward would be great. Thank you.
I see Carol on staff. Let me go ahead.
Yes, I was taking notes for group 6, and all of us were older, and we know that when we were younger, it would have made a tremendous difference for us if we had the universal basic income. Less so as older people, but even with older people, there are a lot of us that have spouses or friends or family that need to be taken care of, where it would really help. And one of the things we came up with was that it was one of the members of the group is a retired librarian, and she was saying it would be really helpful to have a central location where we had the facts and figures on current universal basic income programs, where we could look it up and refer to it. and the universal basic income was more likely to be accepted than programs for specific populations, because it's for everyone, and it's not setting people up to fight against each other.
I just wanted to say that one of the things I like about the care income is that it actually begins to count some of the unwaged work that people are doing. Women and men, but particularly women who tend to do a bit more of the caregiving side of things. And show how much we are being ripped off in the current society. And that, in fact, whether it's called a basic income or a care income, it's not only something that's a good deed, but it's actually something that's owed. And, that an enormous amount of unwaged work is done, particularly in caregiving. In other countries, a lot of it, small farming on the land, without which families wouldn't survive, but which is hidden. And so I like these discussions about basic income and care income, because it makes visible that kind of, all of that invisible work that's going on, and saying, we're entitled on that basis. It's not somebody's just being good-hearted.
Yeah, thank you for that, Sydney. Rachel, you have something to add on to Carol's?
Yeah, sort of to add on that, we also discussed, how low the wages are of women, mainly women, but not only, in like childcare jobs, taking care of elderly people, and that's a reflection of the lack of value put on caregiving generally, that those jobs are so low paid, and that, they would be valued much more if women's unpaid work was valued and paid for. And then I spoke a bit about having already the experience of having child tax credits, well, child benefit in the UK, which a lot of European countries have those benefits that just, haven't existed in the US. And that it made a huge difference, every week to get that money from the government. And then you take it to the post office and cash it out every week. I mean, that was just made a huge difference, especially if you're low income. And I'm glad that's going to be is happening now in the US, but it's something the US has been really behind in, not providing any resources.
I had sort of, unfortunately, kind of an emergency situation to deal with here. So I'm not sure if anybody else reported back from group 2? Did anyone say anything about that? Oh, no, okay. And if I can get someone to keep the dog from barking behind me. But I mean, I can just, these are very rough notes, but one person Jackie raised about what enable us to do more organizing. It would, like, if we could devote our time to really working for further change or whatever. But in some of the things that we've been organizing around, as Wendy pointed out, wouldn't even need perhaps to be addressed. And that the lack of this kind of a income, care income, and the guaranteed basic income, is, of course, it causes an increase in crime, and as Jackie said, this should be a birthright, a human right to have this kind of income, and that I can't read my handwriting here, and that so many people's gifts are lost because we're forced to take these kind of jobs and things like that. So it could give us a chance to reshape society, so we could use our talents and have the kind of satisfying life in the world that we want. And it also, as people, I think I started to hear people saying that would deal with our being pitted against each other, the deserving, the non-deserving, for the workers, non-workers. We're all workers who start, as people said, to bring out what work and what our contributions are, and the caring work and things that are often invisible but critical to society. And I don't know if other people have things that you wanted to say, so that was a very rough report.
Thanks, Sydney. I see Margaret on stage.
Yeah, that Pat actually said some of what I wanted to say. I see we only have a few minutes, but the challenge is, and Jim, I was interested to hear you say, I actually agree. I think it's an important conversation between people who are part of the basic income movement and the care income movement. It really is an important and useful conversation. I know that some in the basic income I've heard say that they are seeing it in part as a recognition of unpaid caregiving work. Some people are starting to use that kind of language, but I think Sydney is absolutely right that the trillions of dollars that we produce each year that then are taken from us and used for war and destroying the planet, basically. We want to reclaim that, but when we are demanding anything, we're treated as though we're charity cases. We just have to look at what's happening with Build Back Better plan and Manchin going on about, these are people who just want handouts. What the hell is he talking about? He's a coal baron, for crying out loud. And how much taxes are they paying? But the challenge I want to throw out is that I think we have to redefine what work is and who is a worker. We have to look at our language, because I can't think of anybody who isn't working. Some of us are paid and some of us aren't paid, but we're all working. And I think we accept that language of the market, and it allows us to be divided one from each other, and it allows the Manchins of the world to talk about an entitlement society, as opposed to the other way around, when Jeff Bezos and the rest of them are getting away with not paying their fair share. So I just wanted to say that, and it's been such a rich discussion. Just thank everybody for participating in this. To be continued, I'm sure. Thank you.
Nell or someone, do you want to close us out now?
Yes, thank you so much, Jim, and all. Sydney, fantastic, to hear about the care income and, your perspective on the history from the first person point of view is really invaluable. And Jim, the work that you're doing on the basic income, is like really, significant. And I appreciate, you just bringing to our attention that this is in alignment with the campaign. This is not something that we would have to lean over to support. So yeah, thanks for that work that you both are doing. And want to appreciate everybody for joining us, and a special shout out to Margaret as the convener of the Policy and Political Education Working Group, a very active working group in the campaign. And want to shout out the tech team, Wendy Roskin, Peg Miller, Reverend Rowan. Yes, thank you so much for your support. And Michelle Hayes from the sidelines with her support. And just to remind everybody that we hope to see you on Sunday at 3:00 at the Climate Crisis event, which should be, the timing is perfect. And the next meeting of the Jubilee Policy Study Group is Thursday, December 9th at 12. So we hope, if we don't see you between now and then, we hope that we will see you then. And as is the tradition in the Poor People's Campaign, we have a call and response. And so we often close our meetings with this particular call and response. And so the call is forward together, and the response is not one step back. And we generally do it 3 times. And so I'm going to say forward together.
Not one step back.
Forward together.
Not
one step back.
Forward together.
Not one step back.